There are worlds whose suns have long since perished, lifeless embers drifting in the ink-black sea of time. And yet, their echoes linger, faint, flickering remnants of empires that dared to stand against the dark, only to crumble beneath the weight of their own ambition. The stars do not mourn them. The stars forget, but there is one place in this galaxy where forgetting is not allowed. Terra, holy Terra, the cradle of humanity, now buried beneath a crust of ash, steel and sorrow. Its sky is choked by the unceasing churn of orbital debris and golden war barges. Billions walk its surface, never seeing the stars, never questioning the silence. They kneel before a throne they do not understand, offering prayers to a God who does not speak, whose breath is but a memory sustained by the agony of 1,000 sacrificed psychers each day. And beneath it all, deeper than any vault, lower than even the remembered sins of old night, the golden throne hums, not with life, but with purpose. It was never meant to be a prison. It was never meant to keep him alive. It was never meant to become a god's tomb. We truly care for you, dear listener. In a galaxy as vast and broken as this, your presence brings warmth to forgotten halls and flickers of hope to long-dead stars. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, and let's get started. 10,000 years ago, the throne sang with light. Its machine spirit, vast and cryptic, had not yet been shrouded in sacred oils, or bound by the chants of Martian tech priests. It was a creation of absolute intent, a marvel of logic and psychic mastery, a confluence of science and soul. The Emperor did not sit upon it then. He stood before it, hands trembling not with fear, but with doubt. In those days, he was not yet a god. He did not want to be. The galaxy had just begun to heal from the long night. The unification wars had drawn to a close, blood-soaked and terrible. He had crafted demigods in the shape of suns, scattered them among the stars like broken glass, and sent forth his legions to reclaim mankind's scattered heritage. But even then, he knew, conquest was not enough. The warp would never sleep. The gods of chaos would never forget. And so he turned to the Golden Throne, not as a monument, but as a final answer. Its true design was hidden from nearly all. Only Malkador the Sigillite, the Emperor's closest companion and confidant, understood the throne's original intent, not to sustain life, but to close the eye, to seal the warp itself. Project Threnos, they had called it, the Lamentation, a one-way key that would lock the Imperium behind an eternal wall of null space, denying the gods their feast of mortal emotion, a mercy for mankind, a death sentence for the beings beyond. And yet, as the throne's circuit spun, and its psychic lattice drank from the void, he hesitated. In that moment, he saw futures unravel before his mind's eye, timelines upon timelines, branching into oblivion. In some, humanity flourished, but hollow. In others, it burned too brightly, too fast. But in all, one truth remained. To seal the warp was to silence the soul, not just of daemons, but of men. He stepped back. "I see too far," he whispered, voice heavy with millennia. "I see too much. And yet, I do not see enough." He turned to Malkador, that grim, withered shadow always by his side. The Sigillite spoke no words. He only nodded, ever loyal, and began rewriting the fail-safes, just in case. And now he sits, the Emperor of mankind, throne-bound for 10,000 years, fed upon the soul light of psychers culled from across the galaxy. He sees through them, speaks in pain hymns, commands armies in silence. To most he is no longer a man. He is myth, a beacon, a god. But beneath that still surface, beneath the layer of sacrificial ritual and golden opulence, something else endures. Memory, regret, and purpose twisted, buried, but not gone. There are moments, rare and terrible, when the Emperor's presence pulses through the throne with unbearable force. when the machine spirit howls like a wounded god, when the fabric of reality near Terra shudders, and even the most hardened custodes feel something ancient and angry stirring deep within the core of the throne. Those are the days the High Lords dare not speak. Those are the days the Adeptus Astrotelepathica suffers higher than average psychofailure rates. Those are the days when it becomes clear the Emperor is still watching, and perhaps he remembers. Outside the throne room, beyond the kilometers of golden corridors and silent honor guards, the Imperium goes on. Worlds are conquered, heresies are purged, the ecclesiarchy spreads its holy lies. No one remembers that the Golden Throne was once an engine of liberation, not preservation. No one recalls the original blueprints buried beneath cathedrals of skulls and ossified dogma. No one, save perhaps one. Valentosa, a custodian bred for silence and obedience, but also, perhaps, for something more. He walks the edge of memory, drawn by echoes and flickers, anomalies in the throne's phi readings, ghost code in the palace vaults, a whisper beneath the golden hum. He does not yet know what he is hearing. He only knows it is calling, and deep beneath Terra, below the layers of sanctified circuitry and techno-mystical rites, a pulse begins. Faint, steady, forgotten, but not gone. The Golden Throne is remembering, and the Emperor, in whatever fragment of soul still clings to his shattered body, begins to stir. The throne was not the Emperor's first miracle, nor would it be his last, but it was perhaps his most dangerous. Before the Imperium was forged in fire and compliance, before the Primarchs were scattered across the stars, and long before the lies of the ecclesiarchy calcified into holy scripture, the Emperor stood not as a god, but as an architect, a master of order, amid the swirling entropy of a broken galaxy. His gaze reached far beyond Terra, beyond the solar system, past even the physical dimensions of space. He had glimpsed the truth. The warp could not be bargained with. Not forever. It could only be sealed. And so, with vision unshaken and hands stained by the blood of tyrants, he began Project Threnos. The vault of shards lay deep beneath the Himalayan ranges, beneath even the lowest catacombs of the imperial palace. Few even among the Emperor's inner circle knew of its construction. It was no more than a myth among the Mechanicum, an impossible experiment forbidden even in theory. Yet within it, foundations were laid not with mortar, but with sigils wrought in thought and time. The walls thrummed with psychic inertia, carved runes flickering like dying stars across quantum stone. The throne's core lattice, an impossible interlace of old Night-era tech, black stone, and something more ancient, was brought here in secret. A device to sever the tether between the Imperium and real space. A scalpel for the gods themselves. It was here, in silence, that Malkador the Sigillite first stood before it. He had served the Emperor for longer than any could count, longer than even the Thunder Warriors remembered. A perpetual, perhaps, or simply a man too stubborn to die. Malkador was a scholar of impossible things, lawkeeper of lost ages, warden of forbidden truths, and yet, as he gazed into the throne's lattice, he saw not salvation but annihilation. A cage for the gods, he muttered, fingers tracing the filaments of psychoreactive crystal. But will it also be a cage for us? The Emperor said nothing. He was seated before the framework, eyes closed, mind immersed in thousands of futures at once, with each new glimpse into what could be. His expression grew darker. "This is the only way," he finally said. "Not just for mankind, but for all life. The warp has no balance, no anchor. It was never meant to endure the weight of mortal thought." "And the cost?" Malkador asked. "There will be no daemons," the Emperor said. "No gods, no madness, no need for belief." "And no dreams," Malkador whispered. "No art, no love, no sorrow. The psychic flame will dim. We will be quiet, empty." The Emperor rose. His silhouette, bathed in golden light, seemed godlike even then. "Then we must decide," he said, whether survival is worth the death of what makes us human. But the Emperor was not alone in watching. In the ruins of Monarchia, in the deep vaults of the Word-Bearer's sacred libraries, whispers stirred. Erebus, first among the betrayers, priest in all but name, had begun to hear strange truths, secrets carried on the currents of the Imperium, seeded by darker voices. He had once walked with Malcador, back when the ecclesiarchy was still a thought unborn. He had studied at the imperial palace under pretense of architectural supervision, learning the shape of its hidden arteries. He had seen the throne only once. That was enough. It is not what they claim, he had whispered to Corfaran. It is not life support. It is not navigation. It is containment. You speak treason? His mentor had hissed. No, I speak truth. It is a door, a wall, a key, and it was never meant to stay closed forever. The word-bearers began to scheme, not openly, not yet. But even then, the seeds of corruption were sown not through defiance, but through curiosity, through the fear that perhaps the Emperor was hiding something, that in all his brilliance there was pride, and in pride weakness. And Erebus knew that if such a weapon existed, if the warp could be silenced, then the gods of the warp would not remain idle. They would fight back. And so, Malcador lied. He lied to the Mechanicum, feeding them blueprints that omitted core elements. He lied to the Custodes, assuring them the throne was merely a throne. He lied to the imperial court, saying it was a communication lattice, a beacon for faster expansion. And he lied to himself. Late in his sanctum, behind null walls and soul seals, he stared into the flame of a single candle and read the Emperor's private script, the final protocol that would, if activated, collapse the Eye of Terra into inert void, a pulse of null space that would close all warp access in 100,000 light-year radius. He burned the scroll. Or so he thought. The data lingered, fractured, hidden in the crystalline sublevels of the throne's quantum systems, ghost code waiting to be found. He did not destroy it out of mercy. He destroyed it out of fear. Outside, Terra began to change. The imperial truth spread like wildfire, a doctrine of reason, of atheism, of logic over faith. The warp was a tool, nothing more. Psychers were instruments. The Emperor was not a god, but Malcador saw the contradiction. The people needed something more, something to believe in. And so he began work on a hidden volume, a second Lectitio Divinitatus, the Black Edition. It would never be published. It was not scripture, it was warning. If he dies, do not revive him. If the throne fails, do not repair it. Let the wound bleed. Let the stars fade. Better extinction than eternal silence. He signed it with his true name, one forgotten even to the records of the Custodes. He hid the tome beneath a cogitator shrine in the lowest vault of the librarium. Eternity. And he prayed, not to gods, to memory. Erebus returned to Monarchia with knowledge he was not meant to possess. He began speaking in riddles, whispering to the word-bearers of a silent apocalypse, a false god who would murder the soul of mankind, not to enslave it, but to save it. Worship is not our enemy, he told them. The absence of worship is. They would have us become machines, without rage, without hunger, without love. He painted the Emperor not as tyrant, but as anti-god, a being whose goal was the sterilization of all divinity, even chaos. And so the word-bearers began to build cathedrals, not just to their gods, but in defiance of the throne itself. On Terra, the Emperor watched from the throne room, his features cold. Unreadable, Malcador stood beside him, arms folded, face pale. They are building lies, Malcador said. They are building what they need, the Emperor replied. But it is false. We will lose control. We already have, the Emperor said, and we must let it happen. Malcador turned sharply, fury rare in his voice. We can end it.
We can activate Threnos.
The Emperor's eyes closed. No, he whispered. Not yet. Malkador lowered his head and did not speak again for a long, long time. In the shadow of the golden throne, silence carried weight. Not the peaceful silence of contemplation or sleep, but a crushing stillness, as if reality itself dared not speak in the presence of such ancient machinery. Malkador the Sigillite stood alone beneath its humming radiance, his aging frame dwarfed by the towering network of arcane pylons and soul-reactive conduits. The throne no longer shimmered as it had in its first days. It pulsed now like a caged heart beating too slow and too hard. He had returned to this sanctum, not to worship, not to serve, but to question, and to remember. There was a time when Malkador had believed in the throne's promise. He remembered when it had not yet bound the Emperor in agony, when it had not devoured psychos to stay alight, when it had not needed chants and incense to stabilize its code. Back then, it had been pure, a weapon against the gods of the warp, a firewall to preserve human thought from the taint of Imperium, a final act of defiance against the forces that had whispered madness into the ears of mankind since time immemorial. But that time had passed. Now the throne whispered things, ghost echoes of lost moments, of aborted timelines and dreams that had no chance to be born. Malkador, with his soul attuned by centuries of exposure to the Emperor's aura, began to feel these echoes, not as noise but as lament, not as prophecy, but as guilt. He moved through the dimly lit conduits beneath the throne room, robes brushing against cold stone etched with hexagrammic wards. Servo skulls followed him like silent attendants, flickering data-picked projections around his head. Records from ages past. Project Threnos, manifests, psychodrain, models, custodian clearance logs, soul map overlays of Terra itself. He ignored them all. He was not here for answers. He was here for the question he dared not ask aloud. Was I wrong to stop him? Long ago, in those final days before the heresy, Malkador had been given command over the final activation protocols of the throne. The Emperor, knowing what was to come, had entrusted him with a choice: complete the seal if he were lost in battle,
and the warp's influence forever.
But the moment had come, and Malkador had paused. He had watched Terra burn. He had seen the fleets of Horus descend upon the cradle of mankind. He had felt the psychic convulsions of chaos rage like a tide upon the edge of sanity. And still he had hesitated, because to seal the warp was to close everything. No more psychic connection. No more Astronomicon. No more warp travel. No more visions. No more soul. It would have been peace, but also silence. Safety, but also extinction. Slow and absolute. And Malkador had chosen. He had altered the calibration, redirected the lattice, instead of locking the door forever. He had made it into a cage, one that would hold the Emperor's soul between death and godhood, half conscious, half fading, and eternally bleeding. He had sacrificed the end for a compromise, a throne not as salvation, but as stalemate. He found himself now in the Chamber of Echoes, one of the forgotten data crypts buried beneath the palace. Only he and the Emperor had clearance to enter. Here the walls were embedded with thought crystals, each one containing imprints of lost souls, dreams abandoned, and futures that would never be. He placed his hand on one of the crystals. It shimmered. A voice spoke, not with words, but with feeling. Terror, hope, disappointment. The emotional echo of one of the first null priests, a psycholess human once intended to help anchor the throne's final Psi-Null protocol. Her soul had vanished the day he recalibrated the system. She had trusted him. She had believed the Emperor would bring peace through silence. Malkador wept, not with noise, but with stillness, and the chamber darkened in response, as if the very stones grieved with him. Later he walked the surface of Terra, veiled in illusion, appearing as a bent scholar in dust-covered robes. He moved through the habs of hive monarchs, far from the spires of the palace among the lowest caste. He listened. A child recited catechisms, praising the emperor as a god of war and vengeance. An old man whispered prayers to the throne before dying in a gutter. A mother thanked the Astronomicon for allowing her son to die in the stars. They did not know. They didn't remember the truth. The emperor had wanted no worship. He had forbidden gods. He had feared what belief could become. And yet now, all of Terra bowed to a husk, a holy corpse, held aloft not by glory but by lie. Malkador moved on, unable to meet their eyes. Later that night, in a hidden sanctuary beneath the Librarium Eternity, he opened a sealed compartment containing an artifact few in the Imperium even knew existed, the black edition of the Lectitio Divinitatis, his private testament, not to divinity, but to warning. He began to read again, aloud this time, letting the words sting his throat. When the god does not speak, it is not because he cannot. It is because he chooses not to answer. Not out of malice, but out of shame. For the greatest lie is not told by words, but by silence upheld in sacred stone. He closed the book, and he felt something shift in the air. The throne was listening. In the coming nights, the dreams began.
Malkador no longer slept in peace. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw it.
A galaxy of silence, ships adrift, planets cold, no war, no gods, no hope, just endless stillness. In the center of it all, the golden throne, shining not with gold, but with emptiness, and atop it, a figure, the emperor, a corpse, himself. He awoke screaming, sweat freezing on his skin. This is the peace I chose, he thought. Was it mercy or fear? He tried one last time to speak with the emperor, not in public, not with witnesses, alone. He entered the throne room during one of the soul drain resets. When the psycho feed was momentarily stable, the emperor's body twitched. Malkador stepped closer. He whispered, I failed you. I know it now. I saved your body and doomed your purpose. The emperor did not move, but for a moment something stirred in the machine spirit of the throne. A flicker, a pulse, not in defiance, but in grief. Malkador reached out. His hand brushed the gilded railing. He felt something speak, not in language, but in memory. The moment they had once shared on the edge of the void, when the emperor had told him, If I fall, and you must choose, let them die free, not live chained. He fell to his knees, and said nothing more. They came in robes of gold and ash. They burned incense so thick it choked the breath of reason. They sang hymns so old, their origins were forgotten. And they wept tears not of sorrow but of reverence. They called themselves the Divinitari, though that name had once been forbidden beneath penalty of death. Now they walked freely through the lower cathedra of the imperial palace, and none stopped them. It began with whispers, as it always did. A shrine erected in the ruins of a destroyed transmission tower. Its scorched metal twisted into the likeness of the emperor's face. A procession of pilgrims wandering the ash wastes, led by a psycho who claimed the emperor had touched her dreams. A scholiast from Hydrafer, rewriting the catechisms of unity into a prayer book and distributing it in secret to the Schola Progenia. Small things, harmless things, until they weren't. High Lord Sekar Elion had warned of it in his final address to the Senatorum. He was a pragmatist, a grey-haired relic from the Administratum, who had never once set foot beyond the Sol system. He had seen empires rise and fall, not from war, but from belief. Worship, he had declared, is the most efficient form of tyranny, for it requires no chains, only a story. He died 2 weeks later in his sleep. No autopsy was permitted, his warning forgotten. By the time the ecclesiarchy had solidified, the cult had already taken root in 1,000 forms. The cult of the throne eternal, the sainted host of Tharsis, the Ashen Choir, the divine mind, the the Golden Seers, the Brethren of the Burning Light, all names for the same sin, to worship the Emperor as a god, rather than heed his teachings. Even Malkador, for all his might, could not halt it. He had tried. He had rewritten archives, executed clerics, redacted sermons, even ordered planetary purges under false pretenses. But faith had a way of slipping through fingers, even those armored by the Sigilite's will. The turning point was Euphrates Keeler. She had been a remembrancer, a chronicler of war, ordinary, passionate, fragile. Yet in the flames of the Horus heresy, she had seen something, claimed the Emperor had spoken to her, had shielded her from daemon fire, had given her the strength to face the warp itself.
Whether truth or hallucination, it mattered not.
Her words spread like fire through a dry city. She became the first saint of the new faith. Malkador had her sequestered, studied, even interrogated by the Sisters of Silence, but she never broke. And in her silence, others believed. Belief became momentum. Momentum became dogma. Dogma became truth. Malkador's greatest fear had come true. The Emperor was being turned into what he most despised. A god, not a protector of humanity's destiny, but its divine ruler, not a unifier, but a pantheon unto himself, not a mind, but a myth. And myths could be used. The ecclesiarchy, born from the ashes of the divinatory, grew fat on this myth. They constructed cathedrals higher than manufactorum. They poured trillions into vox hymns, cathedral ships, and warrior priests. They forged relics with no past, and wrote histories from lies wrapped in incense. They told the people that the Emperor willed their obedience, their sacrifice, their lives and their souls, and the people obeyed, not because they were enslaved, but because they believed. On the forge moons of Makara, the last anti-theist cabal was executed by public crucifixion. In the hives of Calix Tertius, those who refused to pray were sealed inside their habs until oxygen deprivation silenced their heresy. In the skies above Necromunda, Saint cultists detonated holy bombs upon pilgrims of rival interpretations. Faith did not unite mankind. It divided it, and every division bled in the Emperor's name. Malkador wandered the halls of the Librarius again. The walls were covered in frescoes now, vast and radiant, depicting the Emperor as a sun-faced deity wielding bolts of flame. The artists had been funded by the Ministorum, their supplies blessed by the Arch-Cardinal of Mars himself. He stared at one fresco in silence. It showed the Emperor, eyes glowing with judgment, crushing a serpent, labeled Doubt. Below, in the corner, was a figure cloaked in shadow, hunched and insignificant, labeled simply the Sigilite. His face was not shown. Erased. The irony tasted like ash. Malkador had burned civilizations for less than what the ecclesiarchy now built in plain sight. And yet, he did nothing. Not because he could not, but because he dared not. The Imperium needed something to hold it together, and fear was not enough. It needed faith, even if false. And so the greatest psychic the Emperor had ever known, the man who had stood beside him through the unification of Terra and the burning of Prospero, allowed the lie to live, because the alternative was collapse. In the tomb vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, there lies a door. No record of it exists in the Adeptus Terra. No Mechanicum rite accesses its controls. Only Malkador knew it. He had named it the Vault of Silence. Inside it was a copy of the Emperor's true doctrine, etched in code and soul metaphor, too deep for any but the most pure to understand. It spoke of a future without gods, of humanity standing on its own, without chains, of the warp tamed, not feared, of reason triumphant over superstition. He sealed it, buried it beneath 30 layers of stasis runes and forgetfulness rituals, not because it wasn't true, but because truth no longer mattered. Only survival did. In the deepest corners of the throne room, the Emperor remained, unmoving, unbreathing, but not unfeeling. His soul, trapped within the machinery meant to save mankind, stirred in dreams beyond time. he saw what had become of his vision, and he wept without tears. And in that moment, far below, the throne let out a pulse, not of power, but of warning. A glitch, a whisper, a memory. They will make me a god, and in doing so, they will doom themselves. The throne room was a tomb, endless and hollow, stretching beneath a sky of stained glass that no longer let the sun pass through. Great golden pillars reached up like the bones of a fallen god's ribcage, encasing the emperor in an unyielding embrace. His form sat motionless, half living, half machine, locked in an eternal vigil over a galaxy that no longer knew its true savior. For 10 millennia, his mind had been bound to this throne, not by choice, but by necessity. Immortality had not the price of endless time, as poets and scholars once imagined. No, it was a burden measured in moments stolen from death, and given instead to eternal suffering. The emperor's soul stretched thin, frayed by the ceaseless psychic drain of millions of psychers sacrificed daily to keep him tethered to this realm. Each life siphoned from the warp-fed arteries of the Imperium was a breath burrowed against the void, a fragile balance between existence and oblivion. Yet within the quiet of the throne's sanctum, the emperor's thoughts wandered beyond the mechanics of survival. He remembered what it meant to be mortal, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the laughter of a child free from fear, the taste of water untainted by the poisons of war. He recalled dreams long since faded, of a galaxy united not by chains or blood, but by hope. But hope was a luxury the Imperium could no longer afford. Across the stars war raged without cease. The Great Crusade had given way to an eternal siege, where enemies both human and alien clawed at the borders of humanity's domains. The warp roiled with malevolence. Chaos gods whispered lies that shattered minds. And beneath it all, the Emperor sat still, a titan imprisoned by his own design. Malcador had long since passed into legend. His last acts were shrouded in mystery, but his absence was felt deeply by those who served the throne. Custodians kept their vigil, silent and unyielding. Yet, even among the Emperor's closest, doubt festered. Whispers of rebellion stirred quietly, seeds of dissent planted by those who questioned whether eternal life at such a cost was salvation or curse. Belen Tarsa, the custodian who had once sensed the throne's awakening pulse, carried a heavy heart. He had watched the Emperor for years, seen the flickers of pain beneath the golden mask. He knew the truth no one dared speak aloud. The Emperor was not a god. He was a man trapped in a machine, a prisoner of his own mercy. Valen's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Sister Halira, a warrior of the Adepta Sororitas. Her armor gleamed with the purity of faith, yet her eyes bore the wariness of countless battles. "The warp storms grow stronger," she said softly. "More worlds fall to corruption." Valen nodded. "And still, the Emperor remains bound. We keep the cage locked, but the beast claws at the bars." She looked away, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. Is this salvation or damnation? Their conversation was cut short by a sudden tremor. The ground beneath the Imperial Palace shuddered. Alarms echoed through the silent halls. An intruder had breached the outer defenses. Valen and Alara moved swiftly, their steps echoing in the vast corridors. As they approached the source of the disturbance, Valen's mind raced. Was this a loyalist? A heretic? Or something far worse? In the shadowed depths of the palace, a figure cloaked in darkness slipped through security measures with uncanny ease. No vox signal, no identification, just the cold certainty of purpose. Valen felt a chill. The Emperor's cage was under threat, not from without, but from within. The intruder paused before the ancient vault of silence, the hidden chamber Malcador had sealed centuries ago. With deliberate care, they produced an ancient data slate, its screens flickering with corrupted code. They began to hack the seals, bypassing layers of psychic wards and mechanical locks. Valen arrived just in time to witness the breach. "Stop!" he commanded. The figure turned slowly. Eyes gleamed beneath the hood. Valentasa. The voice was familiar, yet distorted. It has been too long. Valen's heart clenched. Before him stood an echo from the past, a figure thought lost to the warp, an envoy of truth and chaos.
A reminder that the Imperium's greatest enemy might not be external, but born of its own forgotten secrets.
The cloaked figure's voice echoed softly in the vault of silence, a cavernous chamber alive with ancient wards and layered in millennia-old dust. Valentasa's hand tightened around the haft of his guardian spear, muscles coiled like a spring ready to strike, yet he hesitated. Recognition warred with suspicion. The visitor stepped forward, the hood falling back to reveal a visage both familiar and shattered, a face that bore the scars of time and the warp alike. Malkador, Valen whispered, disbelief and hope clashing in his chest. But this was no longer the Sigillite he remembered. This was a ghost, a revenant. I am many things now, Malkador said. Voice cracked but resolute. A remnant of the past, and a harbinger of what must come. He looked around the vault, his eyes lingering on the sealed door of the vault of silence. The truth you guard here is not a blessing. It is a burden that will break you all. Valen's grip tightened. What do you want? Malkador's gaze bore into him. To finish what I began. To undo the lie that has shackled the Emperor and mankind alike. Valen's mind reeled. Undo the lie. The Vault of Silence contained the Emperor's true doctrine. A vision of humanity free from gods, free from chains. But that doctrine had been buried to preserve the fragile Imperium. Could Malkador be right? Had they preserved a lie so powerful it doomed them all? Outside the vault, the air thickened. A psychic storm was brewing in the warp, and the barrier between realities thinned. Valen could feel the subtle pull of the Imperium, as if something ancient and terrible stirred beneath the foundations of Terra. Malkador moved closer to the sealed door. This vault is the key, he said. If it opens, the truth will flood the Imperium like a cleansing fire. Valen stared, torn between loyalty and doubt. Do you expect us to welcome chaos? No, Malkador replied. I expect the Imperium to awaken from its nightmare. The weight of silence pressed down on them. Then, a low rumble shook the chamber. The seals began to falter, flickering with failing wards. Valen stepped forward. Stop this madness. But Malkador only smiled, bitter and knowing. The Empire must burn to be reborn. The psychic storm outside intensified, lightning fracturing the warp surface like shattered glass. Through the vault's protective barriers, a voice whispered, ancient, mocking. You who bind the gods, what price will you pay? Valen's eyes widened. The Imperium's greatest secret was unraveling. In the shadows beyond the throne room, Sister Alara and the custodian guard moved swiftly, alerted by the tremors and alarms. Their steps were measured, prepared for the worst. What they did not know was that the enemy had already penetrated the heart of the palace, and that the greatest threat was no longer external. Malkador turned to Valen. Will you stand with me, or remain a slave to this hollow throne? The question hung heavy in the stale air. Valen's mind flashed back to the Emperor's whispered words. Let them die free, not live chained. The choice was his, but the cost, unknown. There was a sound that echoed in the vault of silence, not the sound of war or steel, but of time unraveling, a soft hum that resonated through the air like a dirge from a forgotten age. Malkador stood before the great sealed archway, his fingers tracing the ancient runes carved into its adamantium frame. Runes etched not by human hands, but by the Emperor himself. Runes meant never to be unsealed. And yet, they stirred, responding not to command, but to truth. Valentasa watched in grim silence, his breath shallow. Behind him, the golden-clad custodians had formed a circle, their eyes never leaving the figure of the resurrected Sigillite. Malkador turned, gaze steady. There is no returning from this. What lies beyond this vault is not a weapon. It is a memory, a truth buried so deep It has twisted into myth. Valen spoke low, voice taut. You believe this truth will save the Imperium? I know it will destroy it, Malkador answered. But that is the first step toward salvation. The great seals hissed and groaned as the vault's mechanisms awakened for the first time in over 10,000 years. Gears within gears turned with aching slowness. From beyond the threshold, a soft white light spilled into the chamber, sterile, clinical, and wrong. A light not of faith, nor of sorcery, but of science, pure and terrible. The vault opened, and the past stepped into the present. Within lay a single dais, illuminated by beams of artificial sunlight from ancient panels above. Hovering above it, encased in a temporal stasis field, was a tome. Simple, leather-bound, no sigils of the ecclesiarchy, no heraldry of Terra, just a book. And within it, the Emperor's unedited doctrine, his true vision for mankind. Valen approached the custodians following behind him like shadows made flesh. Even the air here felt different, thinner yet clearer. The stasis field flickered once, twice, and then faded with a quiet sigh. The book dropped to the dais. The sound it made was gentle, yet final, like a guillotine's whisper before the fall. Malkador gestured. Read. But Valen hesitated. To open that book was to unravel the Imperium's soul, to know what the Emperor truly intended, not as the god the ecclesiarchy preached, but as the man who walked among mortals. What if the Emperor had never intended to be worshipped? What if the entire Imperium was a mistake? He reached for the book. His fingertips grazed the cover, and the chamber exploded in screams. Not physical screams, but psychic. Pain ripped through the warp as the stasis field's collapse echoed across the Imperium. Creatures of nightmare stirred. Eyes opened in the dark. And deep beneath the throne, in the quantum lattice of the Golden Throne's core, the Emperor stirred. Not in voice, not in movement, but in will. Sister Lyra fell to her knees in the sanctum above, blood running from her nose. Her fellow sisters around her collapsed in unison. The psychic backlash rolled through the halls of the palace, like a tsunami of memory and mourning. Tech priests screamed as their implants overloaded. Servitors twitched uncontrollably, and the Astronomicon flickered. Valen stood still, his hand over the book, trembling. I feel him, he gasped. He sees us. Malkador's voice was quiet.
He has always seen us.
But he is tired. Valen, so tired. From the vault's far wall, a holographic projector activated on its own. Long dormant systems jolted awake. A ghostly image of the Emperor appeared. Not the robed corpse guard of worship, but a man in ancient armor, his eyes alight with sorrow. And then he spoke. My name is not God, said the echo. I was born a man. I will die a man. Let no one tell you otherwise. The hologram flickered again. Unity was never meant to be enforced through fear. Faith is not a weapon. I gave you a path to rise without chains. Silence. Then, if you have opened this vault, then I have failed. Valen's heart fractured. The words were simple, but they shattered the cathedral of lies the Imperium had built atop his bones. The book slipped from his fingers, pages fluttering open, as if on a breeze that didn't exist. Words leapt from them, blueprints of enlightenment, philosophies of unity, instructions not for war, but for peace. And then came the final line, etched not in ink but in psychic imprint, burned into the mind of all who read it. If I am kept alive beyond my will, then know this, you have made my tomb, my prison. A scream tore through Valen's mind, but it was not his. It was the Emperor's. 10,000 years of suffering and silence unleashed in one brutal surge. And a golden throne buckled beneath it. Far above, in the throne room, sparks erupted from its base. The adeptus custodes who stood nearest collapsed as their armor shorted out. Golden circuitry ruptured as something ancient fought back, the Emperor's own psychic self rebelling against its bondage. Back in the vault, Malkador knelt. Tears streamed from his hollow eyes. I tried to protect him. I thought preserving him would preserve humanity. Valen could barely stand. Then why did you return now? Malcador's voice was barely a whisper. Because I see now, we preserved a corpse and turned his dream into a nightmare. The Vault of Silence lived up to its name once more. All stood in stunned quiet, staring at the open book. A door once sealed had been flung open, and behind it, not salvation, not destruction, but choice. The Imperium had always been a thing of absolutes, of fire and faith, of steel and silence. But now, in the hours after the Vault of Silence had been opened, nothing was absolute. Above the throne world, the Astronomicon pulsed erratically, like a dying star, stuttering out its last light. Astropaths across the Segmentum Solar screamed until their minds bled. Some clawed out their eyes. Others simply fell into silence and never awoke. The psychic signal that guided the Imperium had faltered, not gone, not extinguished, but changed. As if the soul of the Emperor, once focused like a spear, was now diffused across the Immaterium. Searching, awake, in the depths of the Imperial Palace, alarms blared, not from battle, but from revelation. Sister Elira knelt in prayer, the light of burning incense curling around her. Her rosarius trembled in her hand, not from fear, but from something deeper. She could still feel him, the presence that had anchored her every breath since childhood. But now it was not still. Now it moved, her eyes open. "Holy Throne!" she whispered. "What have we done?"
High above, in the Sanctum Sanctorum, the High Lords of Terra had gathered in emergency convocation.
Even the silent king of the Adeptus Mechanicus had taken his seat, a rare sight, his gold cog mask twitching with electrical rage. Lord Commander Guilliman stood at the center of the marble floor, silent as the lords bickered. "He has stirred," the ecclesiarch hissed. "You all felt it." "The throne falters," growled the fabricator general. "The power feeds are collapsing. If we lose him..." Guilliman raised his voice like a sword being drawn. "We have already lost him." The room froze. "You would speak such heresy aloud," the Grand Provost of the Abbot snarled. Guilliman turned to him slowly. "I was with him in the chambers of resurrection. I watched his soul flicker like a candle drowning in its own wax. We have imprisoned a god and turned him into a battery." The ecclesiarch spat. "He is a god." "No," came the voice of Malcador the Sigillite, stepping from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. "No, he is not." They stared at him as if a ghost had walked among them, because it had. The Sigillite, the Emperor's right hand, the man who had vanished in the fires of the Horus heresy. None knew how he had returned. None dared challenge him. Malcador's voice was low. "I have seen the truth. The Emperor did not wish to be worshipped. He gave you tools for unity, and you forged them into chains." The ecclesiarch rose, trembling with fury. "You speak treason."
"I speak memory."
He placed the book from the vault onto the center table, its pages still glowing faintly with psychic residue. "Read it," he said. "If you dare." None moved. Not yet, because fear had returned to the hearts of men. Not fear of enemies, but fear of truth. In the shadows of the galaxy, the consequences spread. On Mars, the fabricator, Locum watched as the noosphere rippled. Data daemons screamed in binary tongue. Ancient machines, untouched since the dark age of technology, powered themselves on. One in particular, buried beneath the Noctis labyrinth, whispered a name never meant to be spoken aloud again. Akashata, the first machine, the one the Emperor had bargained with, or perhaps defeated. The lines between pact and prison blurred with every passing moment. On Titan, the Grey Knights knelt in unison, pain lancing through their gene-coded skulls, not from chaos, but from purity. For the first time in 10 millennia, the psychic emanation they felt from the throne was not a ward, but a call. Not to war, to remember. Back on Terra, Valentasa sat in silence in the Vault of Silence, the book now open before him. Malcador stood beside him, a spectral figure more memory than man. "The Emperor wanted peace," Valens said slowly. He wanted reason, a secular empire bound by logic and unity. Malkador nodded, and we fed it to the flames of zealotry and turned him into a god. Velen closed the book. If we speak this truth, there will be revolt. The ecclesiarchy will burn us. Then we speak it anyway, Malkador said, because lies built on noble intentions are still lies. A sudden surge rolled through the walls of the vault. A pulse. Malkador turned, and deep, deep below them, the golden throne screamed. The tech priests attending it were flung from their stations as the machine went dark for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds. In that time, across the galaxy, warp storms shifted. The eye of Terra pulsed and narrowed. The daemons howled in confusion. The ruinous powers turned their gaze to Terra, and somewhere in the black library of the Eldar, a Farseer wept. When the throne reactivated, it did so not with power, but with presence. The Emperor's soul no longer sat passively. It moved, it reached, and all who bore a spark of psychic essence felt it. It was not pain, nor was it rage. It was a question, a single, wordless question. Why? And that question became a dagger in the minds of all who had lived by his name. On Cadia's ruins, the surviving faithful saw visions of the Emperor walking, not burning.
On Macragger, Gilliman wept alone in his sanctuary, as the light of the Astronomicon flickered.
On Holy Terra, 1,000,000 prayers became sobs, and still the question echoed. Why? Because the Imperium had betrayed its father. Because the Golden Throne was never meant to be a god's tomb. Because the purpose of the Golden Throne had been forgotten. Malkador turned to Velen. We have a choice, he said. Bury the truth again, or use it to awaken the galaxy. Valen's eyes were hollow. We will die for it. Yes, Malkador said simply. But truth is not born in safety. And in the skies above Terra, as ships moved like insects around a planet of stone and gold, the Emperor's light flared. Not bright, but clear. Not godly, but human. And the wound at the heart of the Imperium, the wound the throne had become, could finally begin to bleed. The Imperium of man was not built on truth. It was built on fire, iron, and the illusion of permanence. From the deepest forges of Mars to the cold black oubliettes of Terra, every system, every creed was founded not on what was right, but on what was enduring. Faith was the mortar, fear the stone. And now that structure trembled, for truth, long buried, had begun to stir. The ecclesiarchy moved quickly. Within hours of the psychic tremor that shook the Golden Throne, sermons were issued, processions declared, and dogma revised. It was not a sign of weakness, they claimed. It was a miracle. The God Emperor had spoken, not in doubt, but in divine fury. Across shrine worlds, this lie spread like fire across dry parchment. But fire consumes all, including those who light it. On Ophelia VII, the ecclesiarchal palace collapsed in on itself, as its choir of 1,000 souls erupted in spontaneous combustion. Their death screams echoed through the warp, like a dying hymn. In the ruins, a child was found, blind, mute, untouched by flame, holding a relic thought lost in the age of apostasy, the skein of unity, a thread once tied to the Emperor's wrist during the Unification Wars. A sign.
A mistake?
Or the Emperor's memory, leaking into reality. No one could say. In the deepest archives beneath the Scholastia Psychana, the doctrine of dust was whispered aloud for the first time in 10,000 years. A heresy older than most stars. A forgotten truth known only to the first generation of imperial scholars, buried under vaults of sacred silence. It said, the Golden Throne is not a prison of divinity, but a bridge, a threshold between man and machine, mind and matter, soul and star. It was not meant to hold the Emperor forever, only until the stars were ready to receive him. And the stars were stirring. On the moon of Titan, Kaldor Drago, Lord of the Grey Knights, stood beneath a psychic aurora bleeding from the sky. The silvered vaults trembled as every name etched into their walls. Names of daemons slain and champions lost, rearranged. The names were still the same, but the order had shifted. Time itself, disturbed by the Emperor's waking thoughts, had begun to fold. The Emperor remembers, Drago whispered, and memory is more dangerous than prophecy. Meanwhile, Valentasa moved through the corridors of the Imperial Palace like a ghost wearing mortal flesh. Beside him, the resurrected shade of Malkador spoke softly. The throne stirs not in power, but in purpose. Malkador said, and purpose, when remembered, is a dangerous thing. Valen was silent. He had not slept since reading the book, not out of fear, but because he could hear him now, not in words, but in shadows. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Emperor before the Great Crusade, not as a god, not as a tyrant, but as a man, alone, exhausted, terrified. What if I fail? The memory asked. And Valen, now centuries out of time, could give no answer. Guilliman stood on the balcony of the Strategium Aeternum, gazing into the void beyond Terra. His armor was polished, his stance was perfect, but his soul was shattered. He had led 1,000 campaigns in his name, brought order to a galaxy that bled rebellion, and yet now the words of Malkador echoed in his mind. The Emperor did not wish to be worshipped. Had Guilliman failed him? Or had they all? A voice joined him, faint, mechanical. Belisarius Kor, the arch-heretic who had cracked the code of Primarch resurrection. A man who bent laws not just of science, but of memory.
Did you know? Guilliman asked.
Kor's answer was not immediate. I suspected. Guilliman turned slowly. And yet you said nothing. I was not made for truth, Kor replied. I was made for survival. And the truth rarely survives the Imperium. In a distant part of the galaxy, a world of dust and ruin, Caliban's grave flared with warp fire. There, the remnants of the Unforgiven watched as one of their own. A librarian named Sivran was consumed in psychic flame during a vigil, his last words written in blood upon stone. The lion must remember the forest. What this meant, none could say. But Luther, still chained beneath the rock, wept for the first time in 10,000 years. As the galaxy trembled beneath the Emperor's dreaming thoughts, chaos watched. The dark gods, eternal, shifting, ever-hungering, leaned forward. They saw the Imperium teeter not from war, but from truth, and it frightened them. Because if humanity remembered that the Emperor was not a god, but a man, then perhaps man would remember that he did not need gods at all. Not chaos, not the Imperium, just purpose. In the hidden moon of Ganymede's hollow, Valentasa gathered his final companions. A sister of battle stripped of her rank, a remembrancer who painted only in ash, a tech priest who spoke in Old Terran, not Benaric, and Malkador, neither alive nor dead. They called themselves nothing. They carried no banner, only the book. Their plan was simple. Nead, treasonous, they would carry the doctrine of dust to every shrine, every forge, every bastion of imperial belief, and speak it aloud. They would sow truth like fire among 1 billion worlds. They would wake the Empire, even if it broke it. And somewhere, in the heart of the Golden Throne, the Emperor smiled.
Not in triumph,
but in sorrow. They have remembered, for the purpose of the Golden Throne was never to hold him. It was to hold them, to bind mankind in myth, to let them survive long enough to face the dark. And now that time had come. The myth was dying. The man was waking. And the galaxy, cold, ancient, cruel, would tremble again. Deep within the bedrock of Terra, past vaults lined with the bones of forgotten saints, below even the black cells of the Officio Assassinorum, lies the Sanctum Imperator, the chamber of the Golden Throne. There is no sun there, no time, no sound, save for the scream of failing engines and the endless hum of the Astronomicon. 10,000 psychos die every day to feed its light. 10,000 lives every day for 10,000 years. Yet for the first time since the siege of Terra, the throne was silent.
No scream.
No pulse, no blinding psychic light, just breath. A single breath. The Emperor was breathing. He did not rise. His body, a ruined vessel of charred flesh and golden bone, remained still, but his soul stirred, and that was enough to shatter the stars. Above Terra, in orbit, the High Lords assembled in panic. Every protocol, every ritual, every security measure failed simultaneously. Data feeds blanked.
Psychic augurs collapsed.
Astropaths clawed at their eyes and wept hymns they could not explain. Only one phrase was repeated again and again in Vox reports. He breathes. He breathes. Robert Gilliman stood before the sealed chamber. His hand trembled, not from fear, but from memory. He remembered his voice, his gaze, his rage, He remembered the last words spoken between father and son before the cataclysm that tore the galaxy in half. "You are not ready, Robot. Then make me ready." But it was not readiness that was needed now.
It was truth.
Valentasa entered the sanctum. He walked alone, flanked by the shattered remnants of custodians who now knelt, weapons lowered. He held no weapon, only the Book of Dust. Malkador's shadow followed him to the edge of the throne. "This is as far as I go," said the Sigillite. "The rest is yours." Velen approached. The Emperor's body did not move, but the chamber grew warm. He opened the book and read. Every word, every truth, every forgotten purpose, buried beneath dogma, fear, and time. He read of the Old One, of the war in heaven, of the primordial annihilate. He read of the Emperor's journey from Terra's ancient blood-soaked throne rooms to the stars above. He read of unity, of the dream, of the plan to build a species that would not fall to gods, because it remembered it had been one. And as the final word was spoken, the throne shook, not in collapse.
In release.
Velen fell to his knees, eyes bleeding gold. A single word entered his mind. Not a command, not a prophecy, just a name.
But
Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon went dark for 7 seconds. 7 seconds in which the warp ceased to scream. 7 seconds in which daemons faltered. 7 seconds in which mankind forgot it was afraid. And then it blazed again, brighter, purer, no longer just a beacon, but a voice. In the daemon worlds of the Eye of Terror, gods scream. Karna's throne cracked. Thixanch lost control of his great plan. Nurgle's garden withered. Thlanish wept in terror, because the Emperor was remembering, not just who he was, but who he could still become. The Imperium shattered, and was reborn. Sects rose and fell. The Ecclesiarchy declared the Book of Dust anathema. Yet within months, half its cardinals had vanished into self-imposed exile, clutching forbidden truths. Forge worlds split. Some clung to the machine cult. Others followed a new creed, the path of the living star, which taught that man must evolve beyond both machine and God. The Inquisition tore itself apart. The Ordo Melius declared Terra sacred. The Ordo Hereticus declared it damned. The Ordo Xenos declared silence. Because even they knew this was not the end. This was the true beginning. And Galaman? He stood before the throne once more, this time not as a son demanding answers, but as a man who finally understood the burden of memory. "You made yourself a myth," he whispered, "so that we might survive. But myth cannot lead." A faint pulse answered. The Emperor's thoughts, still shattered, still vast, reached out, not in speech, but in invitation. The Gilliman stepped forward and sat upon the golden throne, not in place of the Emperor, but beside him. And in that moment, Terra was lit not by worship, but by understanding. In the final days of the 42nd millennium, a new message pulsed across the stars, not encoded in binary, not spoken by astropaths, etched in the psychic bedrock of reality itself. We were never meant to be ruled. We were meant to rise, Thus began the Second Great Awakening, the Age of Purpose, and the man upon the throne smiled. There are ages in history where events are not written in words, but etched into the bones of worlds. The Second Great Awakening was one such age. It did not begin with war, though war followed. It did not begin with peace. Though peace was glimpsed, it began with doubt, a doubt so profound it shattered faith, even as it ignited something greater. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had worshipped a corpse. They had bowed to a memory wrapped in golden steel, their prayers echoes lost in silence. Now the silence was broken. The Emperor did not speak, not in the way men expected. He did not command fleets. He did not denounce heresies. He remembered, and in doing so, made humanity remember as well. The Astronomicon, once a prison of chained psychers and mindless sacrifice, became something new. It sang, not a song of dominance or fear, but a low harmonic pulse, felt in the warp like the distant memory of truth. Navigators wept, some went mad, others were reborn. A few among them began to report visions, images not of death, but of futures undecided, shaped not by prophecy, but by will. It was a time of reckoning, a time when the Imperium turned upon itself, not in rebellion, but in introspection. Entire Forge worlds began to dismantle their ancient rites, questioning whether the machine spirit was ever meant to be worshipped, or simply understood.
Magos Tyriakon of Mars, speaking before the shattered Fabricator General, declared,
The Omnissiah was never a god. He was a teacher. We made him a deity because we could not endure the weight of his knowledge. The great schism of Mars followed. Half the red planet burned. But in the ashes, new orders arose, blending machine and soul, logic and spirit, into something not bound by the chains of the past. And still the throne pulsed, its glow no longer a blinding beacon, but a gentle tide reaching minds, touching hearts. A new cult emerged, not of worship, but of remembrance. The Order of the First Flame, born on Terra, taught that humanity's greatest sin was forgetting what it was meant to become. Their symbol was not the Aquila, but a broken sword, reforged in gold. Across the stars, the enemies of man reacted. The Tyranids changed. No longer did they swarm blindly toward the Astronomicon. Now they hesitated. Hive fleets scattered, some even splintering before reaching Sol. A new signal was detected in the void. Not Xenos in origin, but human. A psychic imprint pulsing back along the shadow in the warp. The hive mind had heard the throne's song, and for the first time, it listened. The Necrons stirred uneasily. In tomb worlds long dormant, protocols shifted. Silent kings, dreaming in data vaults, older than the stars, awakened. One among them, Cyrek, lost for millennia, turned his gaze toward Terra, and he remembered the deal once offered by the Emperor in the earliest hours of mankind's rise. Not allies, not enemies, equals, free of gods. Now, in the light of a throne, no longer silent, that ancient offer echoed once more. Sarek issued a single command to his dynasties: do not fire. In the eye of Terra, the warp screamed. But it was not victorious. It was afraid. The gods of chaos had feasted on humanity's despair for 10 millennia. They had shaped every weakness, every cruelty, every righteous lie into a weapon. But now, humanity was looking in the mirror and beginning to forgive itself. Even that was a form of power the ruminous powers could not endure. Guilliman stood on the bridge of the justification of Terra, a vast new vessel constructed not as a warship, but as a library, a ship of memory, of truth. In its vaults were stored the teachings of Malkador, the dreams of the Emperor, and the confessions of 100 broken heroes. Astartes, sisters, inquisitors, even traitors who had seen the light before death. He did not command the galaxy. He challenged it. This is not the end of the Imperium, he said in his first address to the galaxy. This is its awakening. You were told we needed chains, that without fear we would fall, that without gods we would burn. And yet, Look, you are still here. You breathe, you think, you question. And in that questioning, you become. The speech lasted 17 minutes. It reached more systems than the Emperor's own edicts of unity. And in its wake, systems revolted, not in violence, but in liberation. Some declared independence and were allowed to leave. Others formed councils, interstellar assemblies once thought heretical. A new term emerged. The Concordance. Not an empire, not a federation. A reminder that man's purpose was never to dominate, but to endure together. Of course, not all welcomed this change. The ecclesiarchy, fractured and desperate, declared Guilliman an unliving heresy. A new reign of purity was declared. Temples were burned. Planets excommunicated. Wars ignited in the name of old gods, wearing the Emperor's mask. But even in battle, something had changed. Astartes refused to fight fellow chapters. Some sisters of battle turned their bolters not against heretics, but against dogma. One sister superior, recorded in the archives of Heracleion, spoke before being executed. I serve the throne, but he is not the fire. He is the spark, and we are the flame. And in the darkness between stars, the throne called out again. But this time, it called to one who had never answered before. Lorgar, the prophet of chaos, the lost son. It felt the pull, not in rage, not in hatred, in sorrow. He saw the warp dim. He saw his gods falter, and for the first time since the heresy, he wept. In silence he returned to the ruins of Colchis, walking among the bones of his past. And there, beneath shattered temples and burned scriptures, he forgave himself. He did not return to Terra. Not yet. But in the warp, a ripple moved, a whisper. Even I can change. And the gods screamed. On Terra, the throne still pulsed. Its light now calm. Its purpose no longer hidden. The Emperor, once the center of a dying empire, was now the memory of a dream rekindled. He was not a god. He was not a king. He was a man. And in remembering that, the galaxy changed. Not in fire, not in thunder, but in hope. In the fragile dawn of the Second Great Awakening, a new generation rose, born not of war, but of memory. They were not sons or daughters of the Imperium, as it had been, but of what it could be. They were the children of the throne. Across the shattered worlds, in the shadows of ancient cathedrals and mechanized forges, the children gathered. Some were born from the gene seed of the lost primarchs, fragments resurrected by the hidden artificers of Mars. Others were gifted with the psychic spark, rekindled by the renewed Astronomicon. Many bore neither blood nor power, but a fierce hunger to rebuild, to heal, to remember. Among them was Elira, a sister of silence, whose mind had been untouched by the corruption of the war. Her silence was a shield, not a curse. In her eyes burned the clarity of one who had seen the throne awaken. She carried no weapon, but her presence was a battlefield all its own. Beside her walked Cannon, a tech priest newly ascended from the rites of Mars. He wore the sigils of the Omnissiah, but his faith was tempered by knowledge. He questioned the machine spirit, not as a deity, but as a companion. Together they journeyed to Terra, the heart of the Imperium, where the Emperor still sat upon the golden throne. But not all welcomed the children. Old orders, twisted by centuries of dogma, branded them heretics. The ecclesiarchy's new inquisitor, Mavra Dos, led a crusade against the rising movement. Her words were poison. They would unmake the Emperor's will. They would tear down the chains that hold mankind. They are children in name only, demons in spirit. Her crusade burned planets and shattered moon. Yet the children endured. On the world of Ophidion's Rest, a city carved from living crystal, the children held their first council. Elira stood before the gathered warriors, scholars, psychers, and spoke. We are not rebels. We are not heretics. We are the memory of mankind's true purpose. The throne does not bind us. It calls us. We are its breath, its spark, the beginning of a new dawn. Callan stepped forward, raising the skein of unity, the relic that had ignited the awakening. Our ancestors believed the throne was a tomb. They were wrong. It is a bridge between past and future, between flesh and machine, between God and man. The crowd erupted in a chorus of affirmation. Meanwhile, on Terra, Guilliman and Valentasa convened with Malkador's fading shade. The Sigillite's voice was a whisper on the edge of silence. The children must be protected, but the ecclesiarchy will not yield. Guilliman warned. Valen nodded grimly. We must prepare. As the children spread their message, the galaxy held its breath. Worlds awoke from millennia of silence. The dormant star temples of the Adeptus Mechanicus hummed with renewed energy. The custoders re-examined their sacred oaths. Even the Adeptus Astartes began to question the ancient dogma that had bound them for so long. Yet, shadows gathered. The Inquisition's darkest agents moved in silence, hunting the children. Operatives wielded relics steeped in the Emperor's wrath, weapons that could sever the soul from the body. One such hunter, the assassin Catelyn Voss, found herself torn. Once loyal to the ecclesiarchy, she now questioned the righteousness of her mission. In a fateful encounter beneath the ruins of Holy Terra, Voss faced Alera. No words were spoken, only silence. And in that silence, a spark of understanding was born. The battle for the Imperium's future was no longer fought with bolter and blade alone. It was fought in the hearts and minds of its children. And somewhere deep within the Golden Throne, the Emperor's breath echoed, a quiet promise that even in the darkest night, the dawn was never far. The galaxy was no longer a monolith. It was a mosaic, fractured, yet held together by the faintest threads of hope and despair. The Second Great Awakening had ignited not only light, but shadow. In the once pristine halls of the Imperial Palace, now scarred by millennia of war and whispered treason, Guilliman walked a narrow path. The echoes of old gods and newer rebellions haunted his steps. You cannot save them all, a voice hissed from the shadows. An old friend, or old enemy, cloaked in the armor of a forgotten legion. Izakel, once of the Death Watch, now a wanderer between light and dark, stepped into the flickering glow. His eyes held no judgment, only sorrow. They do not understand, Guilliman said, his voice steady but weary. The Imperium was built on chains, but now those chains bind us. Ezekiel smiled, bitter, and yet some chains can be broken only by blood. Across the stars, the ecclesiarchy's reign of purity intensified. Worlds were purged in the name of the Emperor's true will. But the children of the throne grew stronger. Their numbers swelled with those who had dared to dream beyond dogma. On the forge world of Metallion, Helen and Alira faced their greatest trial. The Inquisitor Mavrodos led a crusade that burned cities and shattered ancient sanctuaries. But the children fought not with rage, but with conviction. They fear us, Alira said, as the fires died around them. Not because we are weak, but because we remember. Talon nodded. The throne's light is fractured. But from fractures, new stars are born. Within the warp, the Emperor's presence grew stronger. Yet it was a fractured light, a beacon of hope mingled with the shadows of millennia of sacrifice. Guilliman faced his greatest choice. To unite the fractured Imperium, he would have to sacrifice parts of what he loved most. Alliances would break. Old friends would turn to foes. The price of unity was betrayal. In the silent chambers beneath Terra, the children of the throne held counsel. Alira's voice rang clear. We do not seek power. We seek purpose. Callan raised the skein of unity. Let this be the symbol of our bond. Broken, reforged, eternal. But the shadow crept closer. In the heart of the ecclesiarchy, whispers of a new Inquisitor General spread, a figure cloaked in mystery, ruthless beyond measure. Some said he was the Emperor's own chosen. Others whispered he was something darker. The Imperium stood on the edge, between light and shadow, between hope and despair, between the past and the dawn. The fractured light was beautiful, but it was fragile, and the galaxy waited with bated breath for the moment it would either shine or shatter completely. The Imperium's heartbeat quickened, not with hope, but with impending rupture. The final threads that held centuries of dogma and silence began to unravel, and the galaxy itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of a coming reckoning. In the darkened throne room, beneath Terra's endless skies, Guilliman stood face to face with the Inquisitor General. The shadow whispered about in hushed dread. A figure clad in void black armor, crowned with a helm shaped like a fractured skull. His voice was a blade, honed sharp with conviction. "You threaten the sanctity of the Emperor's will," he said. "You would undo 10,000 years of order." Guilliman's gaze was calm, but his heart pounded. "Order built on chains is not order," he replied. "It is a prison." The Inquisitor General laughed, a sound like cracking bone. "Then you will break those chains yourself." Outside Terra, the galaxy ignited. The reign of purity launched its most brutal crusade. Worlds were bathed in fire. Cities fell beneath the hammer of zealots, but the children of the throne fought back, not with blind fury, but with resilience. Elura led a defense on the planet Valcora Prime. Amidst ruins painted in ash and flame, she rallied those who still dared to dream. "We fight not for glory," she told her warriors, "but for the right to remember." The battle was brutal. Many fell, but the children endured. Cullen worked feverishly in the forges of Mars, crafting relics, not of war, but of hope. The skein of unity was reforged, a symbol not just of past bonds, but of future promises. Yet, the greatest fracture lay not in armies or worlds, but in hearts. Among the children, a whisper grew, a doubt seeded by the Inquisitor General's dark promises. One among them, a young psycho named Jareth, began to question. Could the Imperium truly be reborn? Without sacrifice, without pain? In secret, Jareth approached Guilliman. "What if the price is too high?" he asked. "What if breaking the chains means breaking ourselves?" Guilliman's eyes held centuries of sorrow. "Then we break together." The final confrontation unfolded beneath the shattered moon of Tarsus Ultra. The Inquisitor General led the forces of the Reign of Purity. Guilliman, the children, and their allies stood defiant. The battle was cataclysmic. Bolter and blade, faith and fury clashed in a tempest that shook the stars. But in the end, it was not strength that decided the outcome. It was choice. The Inquisitor General, defeated but unyielding, offered Guilliman a final bargain. "Join me. Rule the Imperium as it was meant to be ruled, as a god, as a king." Guilliman's answer was a whisper. "I would rather die a man than live a god." The chains broke, not with violence, but with release. The Imperium was forever changed. As the dust settled, the children of the throne gathered beneath the light of the Astronomicon. Elira spoke for them all. "We are free, not because we are unbound, but because we choose our bond." The Emperor's breath echoed softly from the Golden Throne. No longer a prison, but a beacon, a promise, a memory, and somewhere, in the infinite dark between stars, the galaxy sighed. The age of chains was over. The age of choice had begun. In the deepening twilight of a broken galaxy, the firestorms had calmed. But silence does not always mean peace. Sometimes silence is only the breath between heartbeats, the pause before revelation. The Golden Throne still loomed at the heart of Terra, but it was no longer the fulcrum of oppression, no longer a tomb for a silent god. It pulsed slowly, faintly, like the beating heart of a slumbering giant, and the Emperor was awakening. He did not rise with fanfare. No angels sang. No stars wept. There was no apocalyptic storm, no sundering of time, no celestial trumpets echoing across the warp. Only breath, a single inhalation, like the first breath of the first man. Guilliman stood beside the throne, older now, scarred not by battle, but by burden. He had not crowned himself ruler, nor prophet. He remained what he had always been, a son a son waiting for his father to open his eyes. Around them, the Imperium reassembled itself, world by world, no longer in the name of blind obedience, but in the name of hard-earned understanding. The children of the throne had become something else. They were no longer rebels, no longer heretics. They were builders. Callan laid the skein of unity upon the altar of the Mechanicum. "This is not a weapon," he said, voice reverent. "It is a reminder that we can forge stars and souls both." Alalira spoke before the unified council of Terra, not as a conqueror, not as a saint, but as a voice for those long unheard. You cannot save what you do not love, and you cannot love what you do not know. In the rebuilt vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, Jareth, the psyker who had once questioned everything, knelt in contemplation. He had not fled. He had stayed. And in staying, he had become the first of a new kind of librarian. One who studied not only the warp, but the soul. The Inquisition fractured. Some clung to the old ways, retreating to the shadows. Others saw the truth, and chose to walk into the light, not to destroy, but to protect. Not all were saved. Not all worlds survived, not all wounds healed, but the lie had been broken. The great lie that humanity must remain in chains to survive, and from its ashes, something ancient and luminous began to stir. On the eve of the 52nd millennium, the Astronomicon pulsed with greater clarity, no longer merely powered by sacrifice, but guided by purpose. Pilgrims, once more, walked toward Terra. Not in desperation, but in faith. Guilliman stood one last time before the golden throne. The light of the machine was warm now, and faintly golden. The Emperor's form, once gaunt and immobile, was no longer entirely still. His eyes did not open, but Guilliman felt them, felt him. "I remember now," Guilliman said. "Your purpose was never to rule, but to protect, to unite, to pass on the fire." He placed his armored hand on the throne's edge. "You gave us light, Father. Now we will carry it." Far above, a new star was born in the skies of Terra. Astronomers named it Solaris. It burned not with fire, but with memory. And in that memory, there lived a people who had endured, a people who had defied the dark, a people who had at last remembered why they had built an Imperium at all.
Not for control.
Not for fear, but for hope. The last light of the old age faded, and the first light of the next began to shine. Not from a throne, but from every soul willing to rise.